on today's edition of Stories from Real Life with Melvin E. Edwards. Our guest today is Nick Peck. Nick is an award-winning journalist with a history in college football who has just written a powerful debut novel called Only Way Out. This isn't just a novel. It's a deeply personal reflection of the challenges faced by young athletes dealing with difficult family situations. Nick draws from his own experiences of adversity, using sports as a lifeline.
I think there's a lot of people who are struggling, like I said, mental health, poverty, trauma, whatever it may be, but a lot of people don't think that there's a way out. As I'm sure you've spoken to people too, where it's like, this is my life and this is the only thing I have for the rest of my life. But that's not the case. You can find ways out of your situation, whether it be sports or writing or music. I think that's why it's an important message for society to hear right now, because everyone's battling something and there's ways to get out of it. You're not alone.
Let's join today's episode with fellow journalist and author Nick Peck.
You are listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thanks for joining me for the podcast where personal stories can have a global impact. And as you heard in the intro, our guest today is author Nicholas Peck. Nick, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here and to get to talk to you about my book and a little bit about my story.
That sounds great. So Nick Peck's debut novel, Only Way Out, is a work of fiction that follows Jalen Pierre, a high school senior who finds comfort and purpose through football and his relationship with his little brother. It's interesting that your main character is named Jalen. I'm a Houston Texans fan, and we just drafted 3 players named Jalen and another one named Jaden. So how did you settle on Jalen Pierre for the name of your character?
Well, actually, so funny enough, growing up, my parents were like big Michigan Wolverines fans, and I actually was going to be named Jalen Rose. Peck was going to be my name after the Fab Five. And so I grew up, a diehard Fab Five fan too, and those kind of things. So as I was kind of writing my book and wanted to make it part of my background, I wanted Jalen to be a part of it because the Fab Five honestly inspired me a lot growing up. So that's why. That's actually how I came up with it.
That's funny. So, in the character Jalen, not Jalen Rose, but in the character, do you see yourself a lot in him?
For sure. And the character itself the book is loosely based on my own life. So basically everything in there, although it covers 1 year of high school, it's things that I went through throughout my whole life. So the story is loosely based on everything I've went through. So Jalen is basically me, so definitely do see myself in Jalen.
So tell me some of the similarities between you and Jalen.
Well, first, obviously in the story, it's a very, it covers some like deeper, darker topics. So, growing up around a lot of trauma, growing up around, abuse, growing up around, maybe not having the best situation around you. So I'd say those are a lot of the main things, but, also he's, a hard worker, dedicated to his craft, which ends up being football. And just really does love and care about the people in his life and wants to help them, which is all things that I felt and went through as I was growing up. So I would say those are a lot of the characteristics that I kind of see myself in Jalen.
Okay. So how pleased were you when you received such a glowing review from ESPN personality Bobby Marks?
Honestly, I was super pleased. I was reaching out to a lot of people because I was an athlete myself. So I had I have a few enough connections, but I was reaching out to a lot of people and wanted to be specific to who I was reaching out to. But obviously being an athlete myself, ESPN is something that, we all love to watch and those kind of things. So I was just kind of, just shooting out emails to people that I kind of had similar connections with or knew somebody and sent it out. And he read the book within like a day. And sent that review quote back to me. So it was just like, it felt like a dream come true when I read it. Cause it was kind of, validation to me where it's like, cause obviously it's my first novel. So it's like, we're doing good. This is good. We got something going on here for real. So it was, dream come true for sure.
Nice. So you talked about your own life experience and how you sort of channel that into this character for the book. How can young athletes use sports to overcome their own adversity?
I mean, honestly, without sports, I'm not sure where I would be in life. Like I said, I grew up in a super traumatic household and was just looking for ways to get out of that house. And had I not found sports, then I would have not had the opportunity to take myself out of that situation when I had the opportunity to get, a full ride scholarship to make sure I had my school paid for and had all those things. So I think, sports gives a lot of people who grow up in similar situations as me, not growing up in the best circumstances, gives you the opportunity to take yourself out, but then also, build friendships, relationships, and connections and networks. That has also helped me as I've, transitioned out of football into the, corporate world and stuff as well.
Have any of your former football teammates said anything to you about a book or even seen themselves in this character, Jalen?
It was funny enough, last night, one of my old college teammates texted me, and he was playing around with me. He was like, "Oh, Jalen Pierre is a dog on the field. I'm glad you wrote the character about me." A lot of my teammates are saying more of those things. They're paying more attention, obviously, to the football aspect of it and what his stats are on the field and stuff like that, which has been nice to see. And it's also nice because a lot of my former teammates don't necessarily are huge readers. And it's been nice to get that kind of feedback too, to like, we want to support you. You're our brother, and read the book. And, I love that I can introduce something that I love to my teammates who, necessarily don't engage in reading books too often.
That's really cool. Really cool. So have you broken their hearts and to tell them that it wasn't really about them?
I had to do that last night, and my buddy wasn't too happy with it, but I let him say maybe if some of the sacks that Jalen made on the field could be what he was doing back in college. But yeah, I definitely had to break some hearts for sure.
You can just always say the character is based on several different people, and you came to mind. You didn't have to say it's about him.
I was like, it was that one specific play. Remember week 3 junior year? Do you remember that?
That's how you keep them on your side. You got to do a little bit of PR.
Exactly.
So what kind of mentorship do young athletes who are facing hard times and famous situations need away from the field? What kind of mentorship?
I mean, I think for me, what I was always kind of searching for was just like guidance from adults in my life that, kind of had a quote unquote normal life, if that makes sense. Like they had a normal relationship with their spouse. They had normal family. They had those kind of things, because those kind of things, I didn't necessarily have a role model to see what that looked like. And had I not had, specific coaches and or teachers kind of show me those kind of things, I'm not sure that I would be able to accomplish some of the things I've been able to now. So I would say those were the main things when you're growing up in trauma and around a lot of stuff like that. You think that's normal life, but when you have mentors and other people who can kind of show you that, trauma and drama doesn't have to be normal life, and you can live a fulfilled life. So I would say that's the biggest thing. Yeah.
Okay. So you've obviously alluded to this several times about your upbringing. So what was it like for you growing up in a home with substance abuse, mental health challenges, and poverty?
I mean, it was really hard. But I feel lucky to be where I am now, to be able to have experienced it, because at a young age, I had to learn how to navigate those sorts of things. And so it made me, super resilient in life. So it makes, normal life nowadays, as a journalist and an author, seem easier to be able to take on those kind of challenges that come in everyday life. So obviously it was rough, but I'm just super grateful to have gone through it, because had I not gone through it, I'd not be able to accomplish the things I have now, and just get to live my dream now, having came out of those situations.
So let's dig a little bit deeper, if you don't mind. What was an average day like at your home?
The way I would describe it is just, just kind of walking on eggshells throughout it. And, as you're going through a lot of these different challenges, you're just kind of living in survival mode. And I also have, in my book, it's a little brother, but I have a little sister in my real life that I took care of. So a lot of it was just me and her, just surviving the days and walking on eggshells, trying to, get through the sorts of things that we were going through. But yeah, that's pretty much, just survival, like most people who go through trauma and those kind of things. You're just trying to survive the day and make it through. But I feel really lucky to have had my sister to give me motivation to find a way out, but then also to have her on my side because, you know, me and her were together along the way through everything that we went through.
So are your parents still in your life now?
No, they're not, unfortunately. But you know, me and my sister, we made the conscious decision to kind of do that ourselves, to separate ourselves from it, so that we can continue to grow, and become the humans that we wanted to be. Cause we knew the situation, we didn't want, what we were living, we didn't want that to be our lives, the rest of our lives. So I feel really lucky to, you know, have made it out of those situations and, you know, just really grateful to have, you know, gotten through it.
Well, that makes it even more impressive that you've been so successful and on the field and in the classroom and now in your early part of your career. So congratulations on having your first book published about a month ago.
No, I appreciate that. It's like I was telling you kind of as we were coming on, for me, I feel like I'm, you know, living a dream come true right now, having to have be an author, you know, and still get to be a journalist and kind of get to live both career goals and dreams for me simultaneously. So yeah, I can't complain. Just super grateful to be where I am.
So at what point were you motivated to actually write a book?
I want to say it was like maybe about a year after I finished, you know, my football career. And it was a transition where I was trying to find, you know, a purpose in my life again, you know, specific to something outside of work outside of my work as a journalist, because I found purpose in that. But I'm a 1,000% person. And I know if you throw yourself 1,000% into something, their burnout tends to come, especially in the corporate world. You know, you don't want those kind of things. So, you know, and I grew up reading books of, you know, James Baldwin and, you know, Christopher Paul Curtis and all these authors that I grew up, you know, idolizing. And so it's something I knew I always wanted to do. And I was like, you know what, I'll just try it. And then I did it, and it felt like exactly what I was meant to do. Like I was doing it, and I'm like, wow, this feels like what I want to do the rest of my life. And I literally would just wake up at like 5 a.m. every single day before I would start work. And I would just, you know, bust out a chapter every single day. And just, you know, 6 months down the line, I had a book, and it was just like, wow, just cats kind of snowballing. And that's just kind of how I did it.
That's really cool. And you talk about being 1,000%. Clearly, just from what little I know about you and the research, you're very motivated and dedicated and determined. So I saw that you graduated with a degree in communications from Upper Iowa University with a 3.98 GPA.
Yep.
What class did you get an A-?
It was actually when I was I was in junior college, and it was during COVID, and there was a professor, an English professor of all classes too, and which makes me really mad. And it's still frustrated. I'm still frustrated that it's not a perfect. But he was just one of those professors that, you know, never wanted to give somebody a complete A. It was just his, you know, super old school, typical professor didn't want to give somebody an A. And mind you, I did everything I could to try to get him to round it up to be an A. But one English class in junior college during COVID, and I give the COVID as my excuse is why it was an A- and not an A to get me all the way up to that 4.0.
So I actually kind of guessed that it was an A- and not a B+, for instance. So it actually was an A-?
It was an A- exact. And I did extra credit to like try to get it. And he was like, oh, we can't give this much extra credit. It was like some whatever reason. And I'm like, you know what? We'll let it go. It's okay.
I remember
at the end of the day.
Yeah, some professors are just such sticklers about stuff like that. I remember my daughter's senior year in college, first semester, she had all A's, and in one class she had an 89.8.
Oh my goodness!
And a 90 was an A, and there was no A- or B+. So it was either an A or a B. So an 89.8, and you wouldn't round it up to the 90.
I'm telling you, there's some professors that you just kind of know going in, that's their thing. But luckily I only had one that, you know, I couldn't convince to get me up above that A-. But yeah, I'm a self-proclaimed nerd too. So I've always loved school too. So that's why my grades were as good as they are too.
Okay. Yeah. Sometimes it serves as motivation. And all I could do with my daughter the next semester to make sure she was not anywhere close to that borderline. She got like a 98 and above in every class.
Yeah. It definitely the next semester. I remember the semester after that. I'm like, there's no way I'm getting an A- again. Because I was so competitive too that if it's not like perfect, then I wasn't happy with it too. So I get that for sure.
So at Upper Iowa University, you played football, as you mentioned, and that made you a peacock. What was it like being a peacock in Fayette, Iowa?
Honestly, it was a dream come true for me. Upper Iowa saved my life. Honestly, the people I met there supported me throughout all the transitions I was having with my parents, as I was still kind of they were in and out of my life. I had people in my life take me in. One of them, being my college coach, my college professor, take me in and really showed me their wing. So for me, it was a dream come true. And then I met some, people there that are going to be the best friends for the rest of my life. So, I mean, I can't complain. It was a dream come true being a peacock. I mean, I'm a California kid. Going from California to, middle of nowhere, Iowa was definitely, a transition for me. But I wouldn't trade it for the world. It was just a blessing and super, I know I keep saying grateful, but I am just, super grateful to have had the opportunity to be a peacock.
Yeah, I don't think there's any such thing as being overly grateful or too grateful.
For sure. For sure. I think gratitude is what we should practice, every single day if we can. And that's just how I feel about where I'm kind of at in my life right now. So that's why I kind of keep reiterating that word.
That's awesome. So as you mentioned, you're from California, you're 24 years old and you're an award-winning journalist already, and you primarily covered finance and law.
Yep.
So as a journalist and author myself, I can tell you everyone that there's a big difference between writing a news article and writing a book.
Yep.
So how was that transition for you?
I mean, I want to say, like, for me, it wasn't too hard of a transition because, like, I've always kind of been a natural creative person. So it's like I'm able to switch my brain to kind of switch. Okay, I'm writing, I'm breaking news on, BlackRock CEO leaving, and being able to switch it to kind of telling my story and being creative. And a lot of, my idols growing up are, super creative people too. So, I'm talking about, the Anthony Bourdains and those kind of people of the world. So, I just kind of try to tune into that kind of creativity as I was writing the book. It definitely was a challenge initially to, with more of the language barrier, of like, you can be a little more free in your use of language in here, as where I don't need to follow AP style or the rule book of my publication and those kind of things. So I would say that was probably the hardest transition. Was just the being able to be more free with language and being able to tell the story that way. So yeah.
All right, I just thought of a personal question here. So you write finance and law stuff for your journalism part of your career. Very conservative fields. You have tattoos, lots of tattoos on your arms.
I do.
How are those received in the financial world, the legal world?
Honestly, surprising enough, I feel like it's been kind of my own superpower in the world, because as I'm going and talking, to, like I said, I am interviewing, CIOs and CEOs at some of the biggest financial institutions daily. And if I go and walk into their office or meet them at a conference and they see somebody coming up, covered in tattoos and saying I'm a journalist, that's not something they're normally used to. So it's kind of helped me be able to get a lot of more of that, proprietary information. And just, I think a lot of people appreciate when you're unapologetically yourself. The tattoos are a part of me and make me who I am. And like I said, I'm a Cali kid, so I'm still, I'm not wearing suits and stuff. I'm wearing, my Dickie pants and Air Force Ones and, a button up, so I just unapologetic for myself. And I think it's helped me in my career more than it's hurt me, than most people would expect. And I think that's just because people appreciate when you're just kind of unapologetic yourself and not trying to force something that you're not.
All right, one more question about the tattoos.
Sure.
When you got your first one, did you say to anybody that was the only one you were going to get?
Never. I knew immediately, like, even when I was a kid, that I wanted tattoos. And so I think I might have been 16 the first tattoo that I got, and I was just like, I have to get it, and just I won't ever stop. One once I start going balding, I'll probably start going to the head somehow. And hopefully by then I've got millions of dollars and stuff like that. So I don't have to worry about having head tattoos. But no, I've wanted to be covered forever. So.
Well, you're the first person I've actually interacted with who has multiple tattoos who actually planned on that. And everybody else I've talked to, they always said when they got their first one that this is the only one I'm going to get. I'm never going to get another tattoo. And then they get another tattoo and another one.
It's an addiction. It's definitely an addiction. Like I'm telling you, I'll be getting one tattoo and I'm sitting in the chair and I'm just like, what's next? Like that's all I'm thinking about. And I think if you talk to anybody who has a lot of tattoos, they kind of start saying the same thing too, you know?
Okay, so let's go back to your writing job. So how old were you when you realized you had writing talent?
I want to say pretty early on. I just remember, vividly as a kid, because obviously growing up in the situation I did, I was always trying to make money. And so I created my first newspaper myself. It was called News for Kids. And I would go around the neighborhood and just try to sell it to people in the neighborhood. And I would just cover, local stories, to be honest, just like what was going at the high school or what was going on in pop culture and stuff like that. And I just remember I was getting feedback from some of the adults in my neighborhood, and the people who were reading it are like, this is actually good. And I was like 8 years old or however old I was. And I'm like, cool, like this, I'm good at this. And then, it kind of transitioned. I started doing freelance work as I got older in the sports field. I'm a diehard Bay Area sports fan. So I was writing for, 49ers and Giants blogs early on because that's what I knew and stuff like that. So, but yeah, I want to say when I did News for Kids, that was when I first realized that maybe this is what I want to do with my life.
That's pretty awesome. That is pretty awesome. So what can society do to acknowledge and address the harsh realities of poverty, domestic violence, substance abuse, and mental health battles? I know that seems like a harsh transition but that's what we're talking about your writing and your life. So that's what those issues are about, what you've written about.
I think I specifically can speak from, a kid who was dealing with, a combination of those things and not having a support system outside of it. And I think just being an adult and adults out there that are listening, to your podcast and to your show, I think if you see kids that you can recognize that they're going through those kind of things, I think the biggest thing that they just need is just support, somebody to talk to, even if it's not about necessarily what's going on in either of those things. Just somebody to be their support system for them. And that's where I was, like I said, I was looking at being a nerd and liking school and those kind of things. My teachers were that for me, or my coach, and then eventually my coaches in sports and those kind of things. So I think that's what society, we need to try to support people more that way instead of, I think a lot of people tend to turn, a blind eye when a lot of kids or people are going through those situations because they don't want to offend, the parents or offend the family. But I think a lot of the times the kids just need support or someone to listen to, talk about whatever it is with them. So that's what I would say to that.
All right. Why do you think the message of only way out is critical to understand in today's society?
It's a good question. I think it's critical because I think we're all, whether it's, trauma, poverty, mental health, I think we're all battling something and we're all trying to find our way out of those situations. And I think that message is, you can find inspiration to take yourself out of those situations. I think there's a lot of people who are struggling, like I said, mental health, poverty, trauma, whatever it may be, but a lot of people don't think that there's a way out. As I'm sure you've spoken to people too, where it's like, this is my life and this is the only thing I have for the rest of my life. But that's not the case. You can find ways out of your situation. Whether it be sports or writing or music, I think that's why it's an important message for society to hear right now because everyone's battling something and there's ways to get out of it. You're not alone.
That's a good message. You're not alone, and we need to support each other. That's one of the things I talk about here. I always end every episode with, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go. And that's what I mean. You can be the light in somebody else's darkness.
No, exactly. And you don't know that what your light can do for someone too. That's why I think just, being a good person, just doing those things. It doesn't always have to be, someone, you take a kid out of poverty and you adopt him and take him into your family, but, just making someone's day by how are you doing? What's going on? Those kind of things. I think being just a good person can go a long way for people who are going through those kind of things to remind them they're not alone.
Right. So, what does your book reveal about growing up in impoverished neighborhoods and broken families?
Growing up, in neighborhoods specifically, it touches on, seeing, prostitutes and drugs and things of that nature, and just, struggling to make ends meet, not knowing where the next meal is going to come from. And, school lunches being some people's lunch, for lunch and meal for the day. Those kind of things is how it touches those side of things. Because those are things that, I think everybody who grows up in poverty kind of deals with. And then, as far as growing up in family, it touches, a lot on mental health stuff, on things that kids have to deal with their parents, while still being a student, while still going to school and still coexisting amongst, in society, regardless of what's going on at home. So my book touches on those things. It touches on, substance abuse as well, which tends to be a problem in a lot of, in poverty or just in a lot of broken homes. Substance abuse tends to be an underlying issue. So in my book, it touches on alcoholism, that's something I dealt with myself. And then it also touches, on drug abuse and things like that.
Were your teachers aware of your home situation?
No, unfortunately they weren't. Just because, both my sister and I, we were when you grow up in those kind of situations, like I said, you're in survival mode and you're growing up walking on eggshells. And you feel like you can't trust anybody, there's kind of an innate trust, and you feel like you're the problem a lot of the time. It's not necessarily, you don't even realize as a child that, what's going on with the adults in your life is the issue. You think a lot of time it's you. So nobody really knew what was going on in my life for the most part. Just because I felt like you kind of grow up in those situations, you kind of feel like you're on an island naturally because of that.
Is there any particular teacher or coach you want to give a shout out to who, whether they realized it or not, who said something or did something that inspired you? Yeah,
there's actually one. He's actually named in the book. His name's Coach Buster. He was my offensive line coach my freshman year and my sophomore year at the first high school I went to. Unfortunately, he passed away while I was in high school there, but he was the first adult in my life that kind of took me under his wing and supported me regardless of if I was having a good day or a bad day, if I was, doing good on the field or not. He was there to support me and really show me that kind of love, which is why I mentioned him in the book. And in the book, he supports Jalen, the main character, a lot of the same ways he did for me too. He just little things like in the book specifically. I'll just quickly give the example, like Coach Buster on Jalen's first game day, he gives him a pair of football gloves, and Jalen I was obviously growing up in poverty and doesn't have money for that kind of gear. And that's something that my coach did for me that like, wow, like that, they're probably $10 football gloves that didn't mean much to him, you know what I mean? But they changed my life and really showed me like, wow, somebody's supporting me on something that I care about, and it is outwardly giving me something. So Coach Buster changed my life, and unfortunately, like I said, he passed away, but I still think about him every day. And obviously, I mentioned him in my book. He changed my life.
That must have been devastating for you to finally have somebody, an adult, support you, and then have him die during that same period.
Oh, it broke my heart. It shattered my heart for sure. But luckily, where he was buried, it was super close to where I was growing up myself. So I would go and a lot of times if I was struggling or having a hard time, I would go and sit at his grave and just have conversations with him. And I still felt that connection with him there. And I still, because he was my coach, every single time I left, I still did a set of 50 push-ups for him too, because I felt guilty going and visiting my coach and not doing something physical. But yeah, it was heartbreaking for sure. But I was lucky, to be able to kind of keep that relationship, even if it is in the spiritual realm of things. Just him supporting me on that side of life.
All right. So the last couple questions here. just on a personal level, how are you doing overall? You've had a hard life to be 24 years old. You've been very successful, but you've had a hard life. How are you doing?
I think life, like anything, I have a tattoo of a wave right here for a reason. I think, life is just, you got to keep riding the wave of what comes your way. The biggest thing is just don't hop off that board as you're riding it. I have my ups and my downs. Sometimes the waves and the water is super, rocky, but other days, I'm riding the wave, and I don't know if you've ever surfed before, but there's no better feeling than when you're standing on top of a wave. You know what I mean? So I have those kind of days too, where, super grateful and super happy to be there. So, I'm doing okay, but I think doing okay is good. I think it's a good place to be because I'm very balanced in everything else in my life.
Well, that's good to hear. I'm not a surfer or a bettor. But I would bet money that you didn't surf when you were in college.
No, unfortunately, unfortunately did not surf, and unfortunately can't surf now. I'm in out in Texas now is where I live now. So
okay, there's
not too many giant waves, but I'm riding the wave of life right now. So
now you got to get cheesy on us. All right, by the way, where are you from? Where are you from in Texas, or where are you in Texas?
Right now, I'm in Austin, Texas, is where I'm at.
Okay, we're about an hour apart.
Oh, nice. Where are you at?
I'm down near New Braunfels.
Oh, nice. Awesome. Yeah. I've made some trips out there and stuff. Awesome.
Okay. Wow. Well, I didn't even know where you were. I just assumed you were still in California. So that's good to know.
Yeah.
All right. So for our final question today, what advice do you want to leave for the listeners?
I think this advice when I give to all of my friends, who are still, whether they're in the NFL and college or just, my sister or her girlfriend, if they ask me stuff, it's just don't quit. And whatever it is that you're going to chase after, you're going to face, like I said, those rocky waters, and those seasons are going to be harder than others. But I think what separates me versus what anybody else that's kind of going through the same things that I'm going through is that, I just didn't quit. I just kept my mind focused on wanting to make it out of my situation. And then now I've kept it focused on, not quitting on the goals that I'm trying to reach as an author and a journalist. So the final message is just don't quit no matter what comes your way once you find that true passion and that true goal you're trying to reach.
That's a good positive message to end our conversation today. So our guest today has been journalist and author Nick Peck. Nick, thank you so much for being here today. I've really appreciated this conversation.
No, I appreciate it too. And everyone go check out Only Way Out. Wherever you can get it, pretty much Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and wherever you find your books. So I appreciate the conversation and appreciate you giving me the platform to share my story.
That's awesome. Please go to my website at podcastreallife.com for more information about my guest and the things we discussed today, including a link to Nick's book. That's it for today's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another chance to learn from each other. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.
That was Stories from Real Life. Join us again next week for another great storytelling journey. See you next time.